When Brian Dawson first moved to the remote mountain cabin in Idaho, he thought it would be a peaceful escape from the chaos of city life. After spending 10 grueling years in New York working as a high-pressure financial analyst, he believed the best remedy for his burnout was silence. True, uninterrupted silence. No notifications buzzing every 2 minutes. No ringing phones or traffic horns. Just the sound of wind rustling through pine trees and maybe the occasional howl of a wolf far off in the distance. He sold everything, his loft, his car, his designer suits. He packed only the essentials and drove cross-country to a small, off-grid cabin he'd found through a property auction site. Didn't even have Wi-Fi. That was part of the appeal. Brian wanted total disconnection. He told his friends and former colleagues that he needed a sabbatical, a long-term break. But he left out one key detail. He had no intention of maintaining contact with anyone. Not by phone, not by email, not even through letters. At first, the quiet was a relief. He spent the days hiking, chopping firewood, reading books, and journaling. The air was crisp. The night sky looked like someone had spilled 1,000 diamonds across black velvet. Everything felt pure. And for the first few weeks, Brian truly believed he had made the right choice. But as the months rolled on, something began to change. Slowly. At first, he found himself talking aloud just to break the silence. It seemed innocent enough, commenting on the weather, reacting to passages in books, muttering when he stubbed his toe. It was human nature, he told himself. Then he began imagining conversations, full-on dialogues with old friends, co-workers, even celebrities. He'd laugh at jokes that weren't told. He'd argue and rebut claims no one had made. These voices became vivid. Too vivid. By month 4, Brian started losing track of time. He had no calendar and refused to use his phone, which remained powered off in a drawer. Without social interaction, his internal clock grew hazy. Some mornings he'd wake up at 3 a.m. thinking it was noon. He began sleeping in odd shifts, staying awake for 20 hours and then crashing for 12. His dreams became more bizarre, unsettling, filled with phantom figures and echoes of voices he didn't recognize. One day, he looked into the mirror and barely recognized himself. His beard had grown thick. His eyes carried a deep vacancy, and his skin looked pale, even under the summer sun. But what alarmed him most wasn't the physical transformation. It was the feeling that someone was watching him. He started hearing footsteps outside the cabin at night. Not just the casual crunch of animals moving through the forest. These were paced, deliberate, human. At least that's what he believed. Once, he even sprinted outside with a flashlight, scanning the darkness with trembling hands. Nothing. No tracks. No intruders. Just wind and shadows. As his 6th month of solitude approached, Brian became increasingly paranoid. He stopped venturing too far from the cabin. He boarded up one of the windows, convinced someone had been peeking through. He kept a hatchet by his bedside and slept in short, restless bursts. His journal entries turned frantic, filled with irrational fears and unfinished sentences. One morning, he found his own handwriting scrawled on a page he didn't remember writing. It said, "They're getting louder." That was all. He didn't remember writing it. He didn't even recognize the style of the script. That was when he knew something was truly wrong. Back in college, Brian had studied psychology briefly before switching to finance. He remembered reading about the brain's need for social interaction. Without it, humans could suffer from a condition known as social deprivation. He dismissed it back then, thinking it was mostly relevant to prisoners or children in neglectful environments. But now he was living it. Research has shown that the human brain thrives on interaction. When we engage socially, the brain releases chemicals like dopamine and oxytocin, feel-good neurotransmitters that regulate mood, promote bonding, and even boost cognitive function. Without those interactions, the brain slowly begins to operate differently. Areas responsible for empathy, reasoning, and self-awareness may start to diminish in activity. Prolonged isolation can even shrink parts of the brain related to memory and learning. Brian didn't need a study to confirm what he felt. His own mind was turning on him. Simple tasks became difficult. He forgot how to cook meals he once loved. Sometimes he'd forget words in the middle of a thought. Other times he'd stare at his own handwriting and struggle to read it. The worst part was the loneliness. It wasn't the same as being alone. Loneliness was heavier. It was a physical ache. A knot in his chest that never untied. He'd trade all the silence in the world for a single, genuine conversation. One afternoon, after nearly 180 days without speaking to another human being, Brian reached for the drawer where his phone had been collecting dust. His hand trembled as he powered it on. It took a few moments for the device to flicker back to life. The lock screen was flooded with missed messages, emails, and calls. He ignored them. He opened the contacts and dialed the number of his sister, Emily, who lived in Chicago. She answered on the third ring, her voice light and surprised. "Brian, is that really you?" He couldn't speak. His throat tightened. His eyes welled up. When he finally choked out a hello, it was raspy and barely audible. "Where have you been?" she asked. "We were so worried. You just disappeared." "I made a mistake," Brian whispered. Over the next few weeks, he began to reintroduce himself to the world. Emily flew out to see him, and they spent a few days at the cabin together. She brought groceries, cooked meals, and insisted he get a physical checkup. She also gently persuaded him to return with her to Chicago for a while, to ground himself, to heal. Brian agreed. In the city, with the hum of life around him, he began to feel normal again. Conversations were difficult at first. He often paused awkwardly or struggled to follow long discussions. But slowly, he rebuilt his social muscles. He saw a therapist named Dr. Laura Stein, who specialized in post-isolation trauma. She explained that Brian's experiences weren't unusual. People who endure extreme solitude often report auditory hallucinations, loss of identity, paranoia, and emotional numbness. Prolonged isolation affects the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for decision-making and social behavior. It can also trigger overactivity in the amygdala, heightening fear and anxiety. Brian's journey became a case study in understanding how deeply humans rely on each other, not just for companionship but for sanity. Connection isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. It anchors us to reality. After a year of therapy, regular social engagement, and a new job teaching financial literacy at a local community college, Brian finally felt whole again. He still loved nature. He still hiked and journaled and enjoyed moments of silence. But he never again mistook isolation for peace. He understood now that the brain, much like the body, needs others to stay alive and well. Years later, Brian gave a TEDx talk titled, "The Cabin That Broke My Mind." He spoke candidly about his descent into isolation-induced psychosis and how his brain began to unravel without human contact. His story resonated with many, especially those struggling with